Well, welcome, Dr. JJ, to Marketing Chemistry. Great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, and just to recap, whereabouts are you calling from today?
Nashville, Tennessee, Music City.
Wow, there you go. It kind of looks like even your background there. It's got like the Nashville vibes going on as well. So very cool.
Got some really good fun background here. So
yeah, very, very cool. Very cool. Look, I'd love to, obviously been following you for a while, like not just the podcast, the book, everything to talk about today. But yeah, just love to know a little bit more about you, StoryBrand, Marketing Made Simple, your journey as a marketer. Give it to us all. Love to hear it.
So my journey to get to where I am is kind of always, as most people's, I'm sure, it kind of took a lot of different paths. But the most straight path I can draw is that when I was in college, I was actually a elementary education major. So I wanted to be a teacher. But I went down to Mexico on a trip with a nonprofit and helped build some homes in the border towns, the slums of Tijuana. Wow. And just fell in love with the work and fell in love with the organization. And so my junior year, I told them, I want to come work for you. And I said, what do you need? Like, what should I study? I'm in school. And they said, we need marketing and public relations. So I literally changed my degree my junior year to go into marketing and public relations. And so right after college, I graduated and I went straight away and I worked for them. And that's what I did. I did, email campaigns and donor campaigns and setting up websites and branding and T-shirts and everything that really involved communication for the organization. And that was my first adult job, was in marketing. And then I kind of did some other things. I actually worked at a church for a little bit. And then so I spoke a lot there. And then I toured and did improv comedy for about 3 years. Did that.
Get out of here.
And yeah. And then kind of while I was doing that, I did some work in Hollywood. I was on a couple different television shows and movies and things, just bit parts, but kind of had my feet in the marketing world a little bit. Cause then even on the side for a little bit, but working my way through grad school, I worked for another nonprofit doing marketing. I had one foot in the Hollywood world. So I did some television and film and directing and writing. And then I also still was an educator. I actually was a professor at a couple different universities along the way. So everybody kind of thought my life was very eclectic. It was teaching,
it was like
marketing, and it was Hollywood. And when I was kind of now about 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago, I was dean of students at a university in Southern California. And I had also just sold a reality television show to a production company. So I was leaving the school, leaving education, and I invited Donald Miller to come and speak to my students about story and how to live a great story. Because I had been kind of teaching story and writing stories, and he was an expert in the space. And so I wanted him to come teach my students about story. And he showed up. I'd never met him before. And I was, we just started talking and I said, yeah, I'm doing this thing. And he goes, oh, I'm about to start this thing called StoryBrand, where I teach companies how to use movie theory and stories to create great marketing messages. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That kind of involves like all of my worlds. And I didn't really think much of it, but I came to a workshop. I flew out to Nashville and went to a workshop just to learn and see if maybe I could use it to rebrand myself or something, and just absolutely fell in love with the framework and was like, this is what I've been trying to do for the past 20 years. I've been trying to market. I've been trying to teach. I've been trying to use movies, and all of this is coming together. And so I ended up kind of ditching the television show, and then a year later moved out to Nashville. And ever since then, that's what I do. My role here is I'm actually called head of StoryBrand, and we help companies who, a lot of companies are so close to their products and services that they have a hard time explaining what they do. They just don't have a clear message. And we use a story framework using the power of story to help companies create great marketing messaging where most companies also they try to position themselves as the hero of the story, and they're not. Their customer's the hero. So we teach companies to use story to position their customers the hero and them as the guide to help create great messaging. So that's what I've been doing then for the past 10 years.
Very cool. Oh, that's quite the backstory there.
Yeah.
excuse the
yeah.
excuse the pun.
It
Quite the
took a winding
backstory.
path. Yeah.
Tijuana to Nashville. Well, that's
Yep.
that's very, very cool. Well, I want to dig into a little bit more into the framework in a second, but also in terms of the book that you wrote, Marketing Made Simple, and obviously the podcast, love to understand how that evolved. Obviously, I'm not sure which came first, chicken or the egg, Marketing Made Simple or the book or the podcast, but I'd love to learn a little bit more about that too.
Yeah. So after I was here, so I'd mentioned I'd been in the academic world for a while, and I had been working on my PhD. And I thought if I was going to be a professor, full-time professor, I needed to be a PhD. And when I kind of moved into the marketing world, I didn't really need it as much anymore. So I kind of put pause on my PhD. But as we got further and further into creating StoryBrand, I realized it would actually be helpful to have my PhD, and I could study more of narrative marketing and be more focused in what my study was. So I decided to write my dissertation on narrative marketing, and specifically an area called narrative transportation. And the idea is that I wanted to ask really two main questions. The first one was, is narrative marketing effective? And the answer to that very quickly was yes. When using stories in your marketing is the most effective thing you can do. And everybody, I think everybody intuitively knows that, but basically I just wanted to know research wise, is this true? And it was true. The second question I wanted to ask was, who does this work for? So does it work for service industries or product industry or B2B or B2C or people who have years of marketing experience or large companies or small companies or sales or pitch? I tried to look at every variable, even if you're a woman or a man, does story work better? And I looked at every variable I could think of in the research, and it came back that actually it works for everybody. It works it doesn't matter what kind of company you are, it works. There was one variable that had influence on whether it was effective or not. And that was to what degree you executed. So if you just put, say, you created great narrative marketing and you put that on your website, you actually, when you changed from, say, feature-based marketing or image-based marketing and you moved to story-based marketing, you saw an increase in success, more sales, more leads, all of that, shorter time to close, more satisfaction with your staff. But then if you took it and you added that to your emails, you saw an increased success even more. If you added it to your lead generators, if you added it to your pitch decks, if you added it, and so on and so on, every single step that you took in implementing added a higher degree of success. So that was the only difference. It worked for everybody as long as you actually did it, actually used it.
Go figure.
So at the time, we were sitting here as an organization and we were saying, if we really want our customers to succeed, we can't just teach them the framework. We have to show them step by step how to implement this in an easy way that anybody could follow. Even if you're you never took a marketing class, you're a cement contractor who became a business owner by accident, you should be able to create marketing that's easy and works. And so that's how the book came about, is really, it was we're just going to give people a step-by-step process to create marketing, and anybody can do it. And then out of that, we created the podcast to really then give weekly tips and help people in the same principle, help them execute easily their marketing.
Yeah, it's very cool. And I think, it resonates because being a marketer myself, obviously, and talking to a lot of marketers, that marketing can get very complicated very quickly. And that whole shiny object syndrome where, especially in the age of AI, which I'm sure we'll touch on in a second as well, is that you can very easily get distracted and be running around looking at the newest trend, tactic, or whatever. But fundamentally, we're humans, we market to other humans, right? And that's where I guess that story brand and that narrative marketing, I hadn't heard of that concept before, but it makes sense that that is the fundamental core, isn't it? That
Yeah.
resonates with people. Like, it makes sense, but we've probably just, it's natural for us to sort of go off into sort of different rabbit holes and
Yes.
trying to like growth hack. Whereas it's like, well, just remember, just remember, like, why do people love movies and great TV shows and things like that? It's the story.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. So just being a little more nerdy about about the movie stuff and about narrative
Yeah,
transportation.
please.
So part of what I was trying to figure out, why is it? What are some of the elements? And there's all these different things, but the thing that really stood out to me was this idea called narrative transportation. Narrative transportation is when you as an audience member sees yourself in a movie. So, or a book or anything. So if you have ever like been in a movie and jumped because of something scary or laughed or cried, you've experienced narrative transportation. Now, what the research shows is that the higher levels of narrative transportation that people experience, the more influence that story has on their thoughts and their actions. So if the more you see yourself and can put yourself emotionally in the story, the more influence that has on you. And it can actually be measured. And there's like kind of these 15 points. It's literally like data points that they can look at to see if narrative transportation can be broken or achieved. So if you don't follow kind of these rules of narrative transportation, then people and narrative theory, people won't actually experience it. So literally, if you break the rules of story, you will experience less narrative transportation, which means that story has less influence over you.
Right.
So like in a very simple example, in Game of Thrones, there was a scene in one of the first edits that came out, like the first time it was released. They just fixed this sentence, but where you're going through this great hall and it's kind of in the medieval times, and all of a sudden there's a Starbucks cup on the edge of a table that we as the audience can see. Well, that is a rule that is broken. We now stop being in the story and we start thinking about, wait, why is that Starbucks cup there? Who left it there? Are we in trouble? So we stop being in the story and we start thinking about other stuff. Do I need to go to Starbucks? When did this drink come out? And you start getting outside of it. That's because it broke one of the rules. That one of the rules there is called fidelity. It doesn't stick together. The scene, the environment doesn't stick together. So when you break those rules, it doesn't work. What the research goes further to show is that stuff doesn't just happen in movies, but it can actually happen in websites, in emails, in social media posts. That when people can see themselves in the story, they will actually experience narrative transportation. We can experience levels of narrative transportation on websites. So if the story the website is telling invites the customer in and they can see themselves in it, that website actually will have a measurably higher influence on that customer's thoughts and actions. And I can't remember why I started getting into this, but but basically, when we talk about the power of story, the reason why that story is so powerful is because story is often a reflection of our everyday life. It's also what we would call a sense-making device. That when you follow the rules of story, like if you're watching a movie about any character, say a dad who's trying to get his daughter back who's been kidnapped, in that dad's real life, and if it was the real world, there's 5 billion things going on. There's all of these details happening all around him. He's got to deal with 50 different relationships, his boss, his aunt, his mom, his other daughter who's at home, his ex-wife, his current wife. He's got to deal with all of that. But the story doesn't go into all of those details. It gets rid of all of the noise and it focuses the information in a way that makes it interesting. Same thing for us. Why we are drawn to stories is our lives, there's 5 million things going on all the time. And when we listen to a story, it actually helps make sense of the information around us. So those are just two kind of ways why narrative marketing works really well. Is one, narrative marketing, when you tell the story in a way that follows narrative rules, you're actually creating what we would call a sense-making device. You're making sense and giving purpose to the story you're telling versus just throwing details. And then also, when done well, you're creating narrative transportation, which has been shown to actually have a higher influence on people's thoughts and actions.
Yeah, and that also makes sense from, the research shows that and you'll know this a lot better than I will, but, we tend to make decisions, whether they're business or personal decisions, like 80% emotion based, that part of our brain, and then sort of the 20% is like the logical thinking side, but that's just really to get over the buyer's remorse and reinforce the decision we've made emotionally or with our heart, we could say. And no doubt that's where the story narrative marketing is kind of touching on, isn't it? Like, it's trying to get our emotions involved.
Yeah, because what you're doing is you're actually, so feature-based marketing would be just saying, like, here is this iPhone that does this for you, does this for you, does this for you. That's the 20% brain. And we do need to have those there because 20% of our brain needs to be justified in the emotional decision we're making. So, because for a lot of us, we go, I don't want to make emotional decisions. So we need that foundational to back it up.
Tick the box to make us sleep at night. Yeah.
Exactly. But then the other part is when you watch, say, like an iPhone commercial, it doesn't go into the features. It shows people being creative. It shows people having fun. It shows people making memories. It brings in nostalgia of a child taking their first steps while you get captured on camera. It's showing you how you personally will effectively use this product. And it's also creating an imaginative space of think of all the things you could do with it. That's what narrative marketing does. And it doesn't always have to be just creative. And, I think that is a mistake I think a lot of people make when they think of narrative marketing. It means that as a marketer, I need to create beautiful videos that are highly produced that tell this story that make people cry. That's not what narrative marketing is about. Now, that is effective and it's beautiful and it's wonderful. And the best brands in the world do that, like Coca-Cola and Nike and Apple, but we all don't have their marketing budget. So how do then we create meaningful, moving narrative stories that don't involve those tear-jerking high production value? The way you do that is by positioning your customer as the hero of the story. So when you're thinking through what you're creating in your marketing is, if to position yourself as the hero of the story, or your brand or your company or your product, you're just going to talk about it. To make it about the customer story, what you're identifying is what is it that your customer wants? What are they looking for? And we have to create language around that. What problems are your customers experiencing that your product solved? And we need to talk about their problems. Then how do we position ourselves as a guide in their story? We are not, if this was Star Wars, our brand is not Luke Skywalker. Our customer is Luke Skywalker. We are Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda. So how do we position ourselves as the guide? And we do that with empathy. We understand our customers' problems, and then we do it with authority. We show how we've helped other people solve the problems. Then in narrative framework, you have to give your customer a plan. In movies, there's always a plan. Literally think about all the movies you hear the words, what's the plan, or here's the plan. It's because in a narrative framework, the audience has to see that there's a clear path forward for the hero to win. So you need to present a plan, a 3-step plan. What are the 3 steps they need to take to either do business with you, to get started, or what does it look like to do business with you? Then there's a moment that in your marketing, you need to call people to action. That comes from movies as well, where there's always a ticking time bomb that's going off. The hero has to act or everybody dies. So you need a call to action. And then you need to show what your customer's life is like if they do buy your product or service, what benefits they get, what value they get, or what they miss out on if they don't buy your product. That's failure in their story. So what we do, I just went through a full narrative structure. Those are actually 7 elements of story: identifying what the character wants, identifying the character problem, introducing a guide that gives them a plan, that calls them to action that results in success or failure. And what you do in narrative marketing is you're actually just creating talking points around those 7 elements of your customer story. Instead of starting with your product or service, you start with their story. When you do that, you don't have to then create these beautiful Nike or, Coca-Cola ads or, ads that make us cry or laugh or get angry. We don't need that. We just have to talk about our product and service in a way that their customer can see themselves in the story. That's what creates narrative transportation.
And that it really resonates. And like, I guess a question to that, thanks for breaking down the framework. I was really keen to go through that. So that's brilliant, just to understand how the framework works. Do you find, like, I think on your podcast, you mentioned that often you'll be in a big boardroom with, bigger companies. I guess, for a small to medium-sized business makes sense, but then when you get into the larger companies, corporate enterprise, I would imagine that you may get some pushback on some of this stuff, or they feel like, no, it's just all about how good our product is, product-led growth, features, benefits, those sorts of things. So have you found a bit of a pushback when you've presented sort of StoryBrand to those kind of companies, or are they generally on board once they understand the framework?
Once they understand the framework for the most part. Now, sometimes I do allow, like, if it's a very technical product, let's say you're dealing with software that you have to talk about the specific specs, or, it's a piece of equipment that you're putting in something that's going to go into building a skyscraper, that they're looking for very specific specs. You don't have to leave those out. That's not talking about you. That you put those in there to show them what it will do for them. What a lot of times people do is they just stop with the specs, though. The way you want to actually hook audiences a little bit more is by going into the benefits of those specs. What is the specific things about that your product or service that give somebody a specific benefit that is different than your competitors? So that's one thing that I bring up. The other thing is that we were looking at the Fortune, I think it was the Fortune 100, and I think I've worked with 10% of the Fortune 100 companies.
Yeah, I think I remember you said that on the podcast. Yeah.
And I couldn't remember the exact number, but I think it might even be 20%, but I think it's 10% of the Fortune 100 companies. And then I've worked with, individual consultants, who have their own private marketing business or on the side. And it does work for everybody. Now, different audiences might require a little bit more nuance to it. If you're in the tech space, you might need to add a few more details in there. If you're in the luxury space, the problem you solve is not a practical problem. It's an identity problem. So the story you tell isn't just like, well, let's talk about how this bag, if you're Gucci, solves a bag problem. It doesn't solve a bag problem. It solves a identity problem. So in that case, you need to nuance it a little. If you work with a nonprofit, your donors really are your customers, but how do you tell the story of your nonprofit in a way that doesn't just make the donor the hero? Well, the way you do that is by making the people that you serve the hero of the story. So each kind of different, for the most part, most people, 90%, I would argue, maybe 80%, you can follow just the exact same formula. But if you're in the tech industry, if you are in a luxury industry, if you're nonprofit, there may be some things you have to change. Where I found in large companies, the way it works better is not in the overall message for the overall company, but working for individual segments of a company and individual products. Because when you are a huge company, like let's say Nike, for instance, okay, Nike is a huge company. They don't need to talk about their customers' problems. They just need to make people feel something. Their "just do it" is not a clear tagline, but it's a brilliant tagline, right? And same with like Coca-Cola and Apple. Like, I would argue there's a difference between branding and marketing. Branding is exclusively how you make people feel, and marketing really answers the questions, what do you do? How does it make my life better? And how do I get it? And I do believe you need both when it comes to your overall brand. But at the high level with, say, Nike, they don't need marketing. They don't need to explain what Nike does. But when you're talking about an individual, say, undergarment that wicks away moisture, now we actually have to get into marketing to explain why this is different, how it helps people better, and work. So if I'm working with Nike, I'm not working on Nike's brand. I'm teaching people how to use the story narrative framework for specific products or specific departments. Same with like Microsoft, which is a company that I have worked with. So with Microsoft, instead, I didn't work on Microsoft brand. I worked on Microsoft Edge, their browser. So it's much easier to do that for smaller segments than it is the overall brand. It still works for the overall brand. But again, with Microsoft, you don't really need to explain what Microsoft is. You just need to make people feel something about it. So that's kind of the difference with big companies.
And I guess like with Microsoft, it's a great example where each of their products are so huge that it is almost like a separate business, isn't it? Like it's got its own marketing budget team, yeah, the whole thing. So that makes sense.
Yep.
I think you touched on a couple of things I was really hoping to chat about today as well. Just kind of the state of marketing as you see it now and looking ahead to 2025. And I've been having a lot of conversations on LinkedIn around the constant struggle we have as marketers around branding versus lead generation, demand generation, the whole thing, but just trying to how can we as marketers justify what we do, especially to, the CEOs, CFOs, those kind of guys who are looking at the numbers and rightly so. It all should be, revenue focused. But how have you kind of working with clients, like just kind of getting that balance, and also with your framework, how does that sort of tie in with the brand demand gen side of things, and also just generating leads for the sales team as well? Yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts.
From my side of things, I'm not actually too worried about my specific side of the business because it's still so much, we're using AI a lot more. Everybody's using AI a lot more, but AI does not have a point of view. It does not have a perspective. And so it only gives you back something valuable if what you put in was valuable to begin with.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If your narrative, your story that you're telling in your marketing is already garbage, and then you put it into AI, you might get it tweaked a little bit, but it's just going to come out louder and faster. So it's like, if it was this, no, I was just going to make a really horrible analogy, but I was going to say, if it's poop going in, it's diarrhea coming out, because it's
No one
very
wants that.
much in the sense of like, that's what AI can do. It can make it go faster. It can cut off time. It can get it louder. It can get it out there faster. It can create systems to get it out. But if the prompts you're putting in and the messaging you're putting in to begin with sucks, then it's not going to work. So my job is to really help people understand the front end, the narrative side of what you're creating to put into it to get a great output. So that's one piece of it. The other, so that, for anybody justifying themselves in this space, I think that's one thing. Second thing really is that the way that I've started looking at ourselves as marketers is really AI now becomes a partner with us. We really do. I think anybody who is not thinking of AI as a partner in the marketing space is going to be left behind, because other people are going to be able to create things faster and cheaper than you, to be very honest. And I'm not, that doesn't actually worry me, to be honest, because I don't think it negates our job. However, what we have to understand is the roles that are being played. And I learned some of this from working with HubSpot and listening to their CEO talk about this. That AI creates the content, but we have to curate the content. What is good? What works for our voice? How do we actually connect with people? AI can offer like context to things, but humans have to offer connection. And AI offers simplicity and humans offer subtlety. And that, I think, for people who are in the marketing space, don't be afraid. Like, I think some people hide the fact they're a little embarrassed that they use AI. Honestly, don't be. If you're not, you're going to be looking bad here real soon, just very honestly. Because people will be like, why did you take 8 hours to write that when it could have taken you more? And so you're going to start looking bad in the other way if you don't use it. So use it, but understand the role. AI is great at helping us be creative, at getting things started, at creating content, but it can't curate that content. That's where we have to step in. It is going to be simple, but it's not going to be subtle. And it will never offer that human connection that we can offer. So that's like on the internal side of marketing. Like, say you work inside an organization. For people who are marketers, contract marketers who own agencies, marketing agencies, or solopreneurs who are marketing people, one of the things that I would really recommend in the moving forward is that do not position yourself as a content creator or a content factory. Yes, you will still be writing emails. Yes, you can still sell emails. Yes, you can still sell website creation. However, if the story you're telling is that you are a content factory, you are positioning yourself against a lot of free AI tools that you're better than, quite frankly, you're better than, but people who are buying your services aren't going to see that. So that cannot be the full story you're telling. That might be part of it. The story I believe we have to tell as marketers is this idea of strategists and almost like fractional CMOs and people who are consultants, consultants and strategists. That has to be a part of your moving forward as an agency or a marketing professional, because that AI can't do that. We think it can, in some ways, but that's where we're still going to be better, is that human connection, getting the input, then use AI to create everything, or at least create an initial rough draft that you can then be subtle with and curate. But I really believe if you're going to position yourself moving forward, you have to position yourself as a strategist and as a consultant, as well as an output, like a content creator. Because AI is positioning itself essentially as a content creator, but not as a strategist. And so we have to differentiate the market.
Yeah. And that really ties into the, the StoryBrand framework, right? Like around being kind of like the Yoda, being that guide. And I guess that's where as a marketer, whether you're, some listeners are actually marketing managers, CMOs at their company, and they're sort of trying to develop that within the company. But, maybe if there's some agencies listening or fractional CMOs or whatever it is, but yeah, try to be that guide, because AI can, arguably never become that guide, because it's, as you said, it's really based on the inputs that humans put into it. It's great as a partner. It's great as a tool. On a previous podcast, AI was kind of described as like a calculator. It's great if you know what the buttons are and you're using it properly, So it doesn't replace what we're doing. But yeah, there's just so much hype at the moment over AI, and I get it. It does a lot of amazing stuff. But yeah, fundamentally, going back to the StoryBrand framework, is humans buy, sell off humans, and that's not going to change.
Yep. And there's even research that backs that up now. Like when you ask people, it's like 82% of people would prefer to talk directly to a human. And so I think the thing of us becoming more human in this space, not less, is actually really more important. And again, that doesn't mean you're afraid of AI. I think genuinely, like if I was hiring somebody for my company right now and they said, yeah, I didn't use AI at all, and I wrote this in 8 hours, I would go, why? Because you could do it. And I know you could do it in 2 with AI. So you need AI, but then also make it better. Make it personal. Be human with it. But to me, you're kind of dumb if you don't in that space, And so I think all of us need to at least have a cursory knowledge of how to use some of the tools. And there are people who are going to be experts in it and great at it. And for me, I'm like, great, you can be. I'm never going to be an expert at AI. I won't be. I don't want to be. I'm going to be good at using it because it's going to help me be more human. But when it starts like kind of taking me out of that space, then I'm like, no, gross. I'm not doing it. And that's just a preference. I'll let the experts be the experts, but that's not going to be me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. Like there's some cool stuff coming out, like even sort of, again, HubSpot's inbound recently So things like, AI generated video and things like that. And it's like,
That was insane. I
that
mean,
was
that was
insane.
insane.
Yeah.
It was really. And what's
Yeah.
crazy is I've seen it been used since, not from HubSpot, but I was actually playing a solitaire game on my phone. I was like on downtime playing solitaire. And all of a sudden, this ad came up in the middle of it, and it was Kelly Clarkson. And I'm like, why is Kelly Clarkson doing an ad on this crappy video ad on this thing? And as I watched it more, I actually turned the sound on, which I never do. I turned the sound on to listen. I realized very shortly it was actually an entirely AI generated video of Kelly Clarkson asking people to download another solitaire game. It was just
Oh
like,
my goodness.
that was crazy. It's starting to sneak in, and you can only catch so much of those. And the other part that I was going to say is that as people start to be able to be better about, I mean, those videos are going to get better where it may ultimately be indistinguishable in many ways. But when we start seeing that that's how companies are choosing to connect with us, it doesn't feel good, and we turn it off. And so when people discover that I mean, think just from a customer service perspective. If you're on a website and you're just getting responses from a chatbot that isn't actually answering your question or doesn't tell you what you want and doesn't feel human, we're done. We hate that. Well, it's the same principles with like emails and videos, is that when we discover and we start to see, oh, this is actually not human. I'm being manipulated here by a robot. We're going to be angry at that brand. And I think there's going to be backlash against brands who exclusively use AI. And not, again, it's going to be harder and harder to tell, but I do think that there's a piece of that in there where when people, like, I get AI messages on LinkedIn all the time, and I close that out immediately because I just know you're not treating me like a human. This is from a robot and I'm not responding.
Yeah, that's true. Like initially I was like, oh wow, this is pretty cool, like the video. And then I thought about it and I thought, yeah, exactly what you just said. Like, how would I feel if I got this video and it was completely fake? Like it was AI, I wouldn't feel any feelings towards that company. I'd be feeling like, okay, you guys, you're having a go at AI, great. But, and then I've even been researching another company recently raised like $50 million, and it's all about AI generated SDRs, like sales teams basically ringing you. And the whole conversation is AI. It's actually quite amazing when you listen to it. Like, it's like, wow, that's pretty impressive. But if you're the person that they're calling and you realize within 30 seconds or less that you're talking to like a robot, basically, how is that going to feel to buy their products or services? I get it. It's great from a volume perspective and efficiency and cost savings, etc. But I'm just like, I feel like these companies, especially like Silicon Valley startups, all of that sort of stuff, like, are they forgetting fundamentally that we want to speak to a human? It's all about connection. And especially like since COVID, I've been hearing a lot on LinkedIn, podcast, everyone's craving in-person events, like AKA inbound, things like that, where everyone's together and you can have a conversation over a coffee or whatever. Whereas a lot of these companies, which is very cool, like the video content or the AI SDRs calling you or voicemailing you and the whole thing's AI. And you're like, isn't that going away from what we actually are craving at the moment, which is that human connection?
I do think that there are some companies who are going to go all in on it, and they're probably going to be successful, to be very honest. Like they will find, like you said, you're going to get a higher volume. You're going to sell probably less percentage, but you're going to reach 10,000 more people than you would have, so your close rate's going to be lower, but the amount might be higher. And you know what? That's okay. Honestly, like I don't begrudge people in those that go for that. I'm not the money grab kind of thing at the expense of people. So that's not my choice. But also I go, man, they're geniuses. They figured it out. I'm not a doomsday kind of person, is that I just genuinely believe there's space for both. Like there is space for that. That's not the kinds of companies I want to be working with and for. But so I'm more likely going to be drawn to the people who are in the more human space. But there's some people who are like, I don't want to talk to a human. That's awkward. Give me a robot.
Yeah,
You know?
sure,
And
sure,
so I'm
yeah.
like, I think there's room
All
for
the
both.
Gen Z introverts out there, shout out to.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that when you ask kind of about the future of marketing, I think one, what I'm saying again, obviously a greater use of AI, and I think we need to integrate that more. I'm also seeing some backlash against it, where there was this huge like everybody, we're all going to die if we don't use AI, and now it's like, hold on. So I think there's some backlash in the market and in the marketing world against it. And so we need to figure out how to balance and work with as a partner versus against AI. And you bring the human touch and the human side to it. Also, from what I see in the research right now, while social media continues to be on the rise, and that what you were talking about, the branding space, bringing brand awareness, bringing brand heightened awareness, that's all fantastic. But there's also an understanding that when you build your business on social media platforms or Google search or paid ads, that what you're doing in that space is you're really building your business on rented property. You're building it on somebody else's platform. And there is a greater need to actually, quote unquote, own your own data, meaning you have to figure out how to get people off of those spaces and into your own email and your own community space. And so even that just almost demands a smaller reach because you can only control and get in a certain amount of people. And if you focus on that community, you're actually going to see a higher return. So I think there's kind of in that space, and email is still the number one investment you can make in marketing, even though it's not as effective, even though it's harder and harder to create and reach people and all of those things. Dollar for dollar, email still outshines by far every other piece of marketing, every other marketing investment you can make. And by like 3,000, it's like, I believe the average amount that you get a return on is 4,200%. So $42 for every dollar that you invest is the average return. The closest to that, I believe, is like $12 for every $1. Something like that. It's like a 30%. It's insane, the difference. So while people are like, email's boring, it's like, no, if you can get a brand awareness on social, get them off those platforms and into your email account, and then actually create great emails with good stories that positions your customer as the hero, that still is the most effective way of,
That's the play, isn't it? That's the play.
It really is.
Yeah. And it's been the play for a long time, really, hasn't it? Like, I mean, well, since email was possible, email marketing was possible, but like, yeah, get people off those platforms, and then you sort of own them in that sense, and then you build the email list, and then you start marketing to them, but it's just, yeah, that's still the play. So I guess just in conclusion, it'd be great to understand, yeah, if there's anything else that you see, JJ, like in terms of marketing trends, things that are like a lot of your customers have been talking about, like from a marketing perspective, there's a lot of pressure on us, I guess, in terms of getting results. And now AI, you need to be like an expert on all these things. And your CEO is asking for more, more with less, I guess. And budgets are being cut as well, especially 2024 has been a really tough year for a lot of businesses, economically. So yeah, any sort of additional trends that you're seeing on your side?
No. I think we covered
and
a lot
we're done.
of it.
That's right.
But I would say in some way, it's not a positive trend. The trend that I'm seeing is people are panicking. That's kind of like what I am seeing, a lot of people panicking. And I'm seeing a lot of reach outside of some of the traditional things that have been working, because there are some flashy things out there. Even, social media. It's like, yes, if you can go viral, fantastic. If you all of a sudden get a product that Taylor Swift wears on her stage, your business is gonna blow up the next day.
Yeah.
Yes, you're gonna be fine. So people are reaching for those types of things. They're reaching for things that are flashy and new. And the reality is, when you're working with customers, you do want to think of it in terms of relationship. And most relationships are kind of slow burn. right? Like you don't typically go on the first date and go, will you marry me? It actually takes a couple different dates, a lot of connection, maybe meeting people who know the other person, meeting their friends, caring about them, seeing them in different situations. And then eventually, and in a dating relationship, a lot of times it's a couple years, then you go, okay, I'm in. Now I'm in for life. Well, if we thought more about our customers in that way, that yes, there are people who will marry us on the first date. There are people who see it on Instagram and buy it right off of Instagram. I have done that. I have not bought things instantly. Yes, there are products. For the
Thank you,
most part,
Amazon. Yep.
yeah, exactly. But for the most part, most of us need a little bit more wooing. And remember that. So the trend I'm seeing is some panic. I see people starting to reach for things that feel flashy. And I'm not opposed to doing those things. Yes, try to get on Taylor Swift's radar. That's wonderful. However, deliver great value in your product. Treat people like humans. That's just basic business. Then on top of that, get great lead generators out there that deliver a ton of value. Make sure your marketing reflects your customer story, not your business story. Talk about the benefits for them on a regular basis, and then be consistent. Show up on social media. Make sure your website is great. Send emails on a regular basis. Deliver a ton of value. Do podcasts. Show up on a regular basis so that you're building relationship. Those are the trends that I'm not going to see go away. So while the trend is panic, get back to the basics. Get back to the basics and just build relationship with people in a way that works.
Yeah. And I think I totally agree. And also, given that a lot of businesses at the moment are maybe cutting marketing budgets or even just cutting, like some of our clients, unfortunately, they're more sort of smaller SMB size, and they've just completely paused their marketing completely, thinking that, they can't afford it. It's not working. But missing, like, once you turn that tap off, as you say, it can be a slow burn to get customers. It isn't instant. So once you stop, especially the organic side of marketing, like doing the socials, showing up consistently, good SEO content, that sort of stuff, like it's going to come back to bite you in the future. And that's what we try to speak to our customers about, our clients, and say, look, yeah, we can cancel, pause marketing, but it is going to have an impact on you. And we just really beg that they just keep something going, because it isn't like a tap. It's a long game, isn't it? So yeah, it's not easy. It's been really insightful to chat with you today, JJ. I think love the framework. I've got the book and StoryBrand, and follow the podcast, and I think it just makes a lot of sense, the framework, and it takes the panic out of things, and also it focuses more, I feel, on principles. Principles never date. Principles are always applicable, and that framework, the principles, the fact that it's looking at human behavior, that's not going to change. So I love the framework. It really resonates with us. I mean, we're a digital marketing agency, but we're a content marketing agency primarily, and that's where we're trying to sort of really focus a lot more on, is content AI can do a lot of that stuff, but is it going to resonate? Is it human? That's going to be the point of difference, I think, especially for brands. So just a couple of rapid fire questions before we close. We've discussed a lot of marketing tips already, but what would you say is your number one marketing tip for 2025?
Well, number one would be have a clear message. In the AI world, there's more noise than ever in the marketing world, and you have to cut through that noise more than ever. And so a clear message. And so I'll give a very practical tip that I mean when I talk about clear message. If your website does not say in the header exactly what you offer, you're not being clear. I was just I did some website reviews. I did a webinar today where I was doing website reviews. And the title in the website said first it just said 100% free gift. That's what it said.
Okay.
And then it said Beautiful Birth and Beyond. Now, based on those two things, I'm going to ask you right now, what do you think that company does?
Well, when you say 100% gift, I'm thinking, is it some like end of year Christmas thing? That was what I was thinking. The birth thing gives away, okay, is it some sort of pregnancy, childhood, parenting vibe? But I'm still have no idea what it's about.
Yeah, they're personal doulas. So it's kind of there, but it doesn't actually say what they actually do, right? So it's like almost there. But then it took me about 3 scrolls down the page to figure out that they were personal doulas. And I was like, that's not clear. We need to say right up top. Another company I was just looking at said redesign and color. Now, where they make their most money is by staging homes. So like if somebody's going to sell their home, they basically decorate it in a way that makes it easy to sell.
We've got a client that does exactly that in Australia. Yeah.
But the title said redesign and color. That's not, no. They also do redesign for the house, but their website didn't talk about that. And so it's like, when I say be clear, what is it that you actually offer and put it up there? If you're a business coach, say you do business coaching or business consulting. If you're a marketing agency, don't just say we help you grow your business. Say marketing services, digital content, strategy. Say what you do. That one tip just in your header of your website is going to change everything. But overall, you do need a clear message. And I honestly believe the best way to do that is use the StoryBrand framework.
Yeah. And exactly. And just further to that, especially if you're running paid ads, like imagine spending 10, 15, 20 more dollars a click. They come to the website, they don't even know what you're doing and they just bounce. They're gone.
Exactly.
So all that money is just down the drain. So yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree more. That kind of 3-second rule, right? 3 seconds. What do you do? How can you help them? All of that. Love it. What's a book or podcast that you'd recommend? And feel free to recommend your own. Shameless plug coming up.
Yeah. Well, since you already talked about both of those, I would say the book that has changed me most recently is the book called Unreasonable Hospitality. It is by Will Guidara. And he actually, if you haven't heard of it, he owned the #1 restaurant in the world in New York called 11 Madison Park. And the way it became #1 was through what he calls unreasonable hospitality. Yes, they had great food. Yes, they had good service, but it was actually about how you made people feel when they showed up. And it's based in the restaurant world, but it actually is so applicable to every business out there. So that if people are looking for a new good book that's fun to read, inspiring, cool stories, but also will change the way you do business, Unreasonable Hospitality.
Yeah. Customer service, customer success, so important. Hey, the whole experience. And yeah, how can listeners find you online?
On most of the social sites, I'm Dr. J.J. Peterson. So you can find me on Instagram that way. If you're just interested in, say, getting some private consulting, I do some private consulting. They can reach out at, even though I'm in the US and probably most of your listeners are in Australia, you can reach out to Dr. JJ at drjjpeterson.com.
Awesome. Obviously, the podcast on Spotify, Marketing Made Simple, as well, can follow you that way and listen to all the good content that you guys are producing. Well, thank you so much, JJ. It's been a pleasure wanting to get you on the podcast for a little while. And just love what you guys are doing. And thanks again for joining us on Marketing Chemistry.
Oh, thanks so much. It's been a blast.